Hello everyone, I am the Jack Bond Sleep Story and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from, and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I never thought a baby stroller could be the beginning of a nightmare, but as I huddled in my darkened apartment, listening to the sound of someone trying to pick the lock on my front door, I realized how wrong I'd been. It all started 2 weeks ago. I had just moved to Chicago with my 6-month-old daughter, Emma. Money was tight, and I needed a stroller. New ones were way out of my budget, so I turned to Craigslist. After scrolling through countless listings, I found one that looked perfect, a gently used UPP Cruise, half the retail price. The seller, Susan, lived just a few neighborhoods over. I messaged her, and we arranged to meet at her apartment the next day. As I drove there, Emma cooing in her car seat, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. I'd never bought anything off Craigslist before, but surely it would be fine. It was just a stroller, after all. Susan's apartment was in a part of town I wasn't familiar with. The buildings were older, paint peeling, with bars on the windows. I double-checked the address, took a deep breath, and knocked on the door. A woman in her mid-30s answered, smiling warmly. "You must be Anna," she said. "Come on in. I'm Susan." I hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside, holding Emma close. The apartment was cluttered but clean, toys scattered across the floor. A toddler peered at us from behind the couch. "That's my little one, Zoe," Susan said, gesturing to the child. "She just turned 3. They grow up so fast, don't they?" I nodded, relaxing a bit. "They really do. Emma here is already 6 months. I can hardly believe it." Susan led me to the living room, where the stroller stood. It looked even better than in the photos, barely a scratch on it. As I examined it, Susan chatted about her kids and asked me questions about Emma. It felt normal, nice even. After a bit of small talk and a test run pushing the stroller around the apartment, I handed over the cash. Susan helped me carry it down to my car. "Drive safe," she said as I strapped Emma in. "There are some crazy drivers out there." I waved goodbye, feeling pleased with my purchase. It wasn't until I was halfway home that I realized how odd that last comment had been. How did she know which direction I was going? I shook off the thought. I was being paranoid. Susan was just being friendly, that's all. The next few days were uneventful. The stroller worked perfectly, and I started to forget about the slightly strange interaction with Susan. But then, on day 4, I noticed something odd. I was walking Emma to the park when I saw a car parked across the street. It was a nondescript sedan, dark blue or black. What caught my attention was the driver. He seemed to be watching me. When I looked directly at him, he quickly turned away. I picked up my pace, my heart beating a little faster. At the park, I kept glancing around, but the car was nowhere to be seen. I told myself I was imagining things. But the next day, I saw it again, same car, same spot. This time, when I looked, the driver didn't look away. He just stared, his expression unreadable behind dark sunglasses. I hurried back home, pushing the stroller faster than usual. Emma started to fuss, picking up on my anxiety. As soon as I got inside, I locked the door and called my best friend, Lisa. "Am I going crazy?" I asked after explaining the situation. "Maybe I'm just sleep deprived and seeing things." Lisa's voice was concerned. "I don't think you're crazy, Anna. That definitely sounds creepy. Have you seen the car any other times?" I thought back. Now that you mention it, I think I might have. I didn't pay much attention before, but... A chill ran down my spine. "Oh God, Lisa, what if they've been following me this whole time?" "Okay, let's not panic," Lisa said, though I could hear the worry in her voice. "It could still be a coincidence. But just in case, maybe you should vary your routine for a few days, see if anything changes." I agreed, and we made plans for Lisa to come over that weekend. After hanging up, I went to check on Emma. She was sleeping peacefully in her crib, unaware of her mother's growing fear. The next day, instead of our usual morning walk, I drove to a coffee shop in a different neighborhood. As I sat by the window, sipping my latte and watching Emma babble in her stroller, I started to relax. Maybe I had been overreacting. Then I saw it, the car. It was parked across the street, half hidden behind a delivery truck. My hand started to shake, causing my coffee to slosh over the rim of the cup. I grabbed my phone, ready to call Lisa or the police or anyone. But as I looked back up, the car was pulling away. I caught a glimpse of the driver. It was a man, different from the one I'd seen before. That night, I barely slept. Every noise made me jump. Was that a car door closing outside? Footsteps on the stairs? I checked the locks a dozen times, pulled the curtains tight, and kept Emma's crib right next to my bed. In the morning, blurry-eyed and exhausted, I made a decision. I needed to know what was going on. I called in sick to work and asked my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, to watch Emma for a few hours. "Are you sure you're all right, dear?" Mrs. Chen asked as I handed Emma over. "You look terrible." I forced a smile. "Just a little under the weather. I'm going to see the doctor." Instead, I drove to Susan's apartment. I didn't have a plan exactly, I just knew I needed answers, and this was where it had all started. As I parked across the street, I saw Susan coming out of her building. She was alone, no sign of her daughter. I slouched down in my seat, watching as she got into a car. The same dark sedan I'd been seeing everywhere. My heart pounded as I followed her. She drove to a rundown strip mall on the outskirts of the city. As she got out of her car, a man approached her. They talked for a few minutes, their body language tense. Then Susan handed him an envelope, and he gave her a small package in return. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Was Susan involved in something illegal? And what did it have to do with me? I was so focused on Susan and the man that I didn't notice another car pulling up behind me until it was too late. A sharp tap on my window made me jump. A man with a hard face and cold eyes gestured for me to roll down the window. My hands shaking, I complied. "Is there a problem, officer?" I asked, though I was pretty sure he wasn't a cop. "Get out of the car," he said, his voice low and threatening. I considered making a run for it, but where would I go? Slowly, I opened the door and stepped out. The man grabbed my arm, his grip painfully tight. "You just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you?" he growled. "You had to go poking around." He started dragging me towards Susan's car. She was watching, her face a mask of guilt and fear. "Please," I begged. "I don't know what's going on. I have a baby at home. Please, just let me go." The man's grip tightened. "Shut up. You're coming with us." Suddenly, the sound of sirens filled the air. Police cars swarmed into the parking lot, officers jumping out with guns drawn. "Police! Freeze!" Everything happened so fast after that. The man tried to run but was tackled by an officer. Susan burst into tears, falling to her knees with her hands up. I stood there shaking as an officer approached me. "Are you Anna Thompson?" he asked. When I nodded, he continued, "We've been investigating this group for months. Your friend Lisa called us when you didn't return her calls. She was worried." I let out a sob of relief. Lisa, my wonderful, paranoid, life-saving best friend. Over the next few hours, I learned the truth. Susan was part of a criminal ring that used Craigslist to find targets for burglary and identity theft. The stroller had been bugged with a GPS tracker. They'd been following me, learning my routine, planning to rob me. As I sat in the police station, giving my statement, all I could think about was Emma, my beautiful, innocent daughter who had unknowingly been in danger this whole time. When I finally got home, I hugged Emma so tight she started to squirm. Mrs. Chun hovered anxiously, full of questions I wasn't ready to answer. That night, as Emma slept peacefully in her crib, I sat by the window, jumping at every sound. The police had assured me it was over, that everyone involved had been arrested. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I looked at the stroller, still sitting in the corner of the room. Tomorrow, I would get rid of it, buy a new one, even if I had to max out my credit card. But for now, in the quiet of the night, I allowed myself to cry for the fear I'd felt, for the trust I'd lost, and for the realization that sometimes the most ordinary things can lead us into extraordinary danger. As I wiped my eyes, I made a promise to myself and to Emma. I would be more careful, yes, but I wouldn't let fear rule our lives. We had survived, and we would be stronger for it. But I was never, ever buying anything off Craigslist again. I never thought I'd find hell in paradise. But as I crouched in the darkness, listening to the voices of killers, I realized how quickly heaven could turn into a nightmare. It was supposed to be a simple hiking trip, a chance to clear my head after a messy breakup and the stress of city life. I'd always loved the outdoors, the peace and quiet of nature. So when I found a trail in a remote part of the Rockies, it seemed perfect. 3 days of solitude, just me and the wilderness. The first day was everything I'd hoped for. The air was crisp and clean, the views breathtaking. I hiked until my legs ached, setting up camp as the sun began to set. As I sat by my small fire, watching the stars appear one by one, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't experienced in years. It was on the second day that everything changed. I'd been hiking for hours, the trail becoming less defined as I ventured deeper into the wilderness. The trees seemed to grow thicker, the underbrush denser. I was considering turning back when I saw it, a small clearing ahead, and in it, what looked like an old cabin. Curiosity got the better of me. I approached cautiously, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of pine needles. The cabin was weather-beaten, its wood gray with age. But as I got closer, I noticed something odd. The padlock on the door looked new, shiny against the weathered wood. I told myself I should leave, continue on my hike, but something held me there. Maybe it was the mystery of it, or maybe just the need for some form of human connection after a day and a half alone in the woods. I circled the cabin, peering in through grimy windows. The interior was dark, but I could make out shapes of furniture, a table, some chairs. It looked lived in, not abandoned, as I'd first thought. As the sun began to set, I decided to make camp nearby. I told myself it was just to rest, but deep down, I knew I was hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever used this isolated cabin. I set up my tent a little ways off, hidden in a thick stand of trees. As darkness fell, I doused my fire and settled in for the night, my ears straining for any sound. Hours passed. I was on the edge of sleep when I heard it, the low rumble of an engine. My eyes snapped open, suddenly wide awake. The sound grew louder, and then I saw headlights cutting through the trees. Heart pounding, I unzipped my tent just enough to peer out. A large pickup truck pulled into the clearing, its headlights illuminating the cabin. 3 men got out, their voices low but carrying in the still night air. "Did anyone follow you?" one asked, his tone sharp. "Nah, we're clear," another replied. "Let's get this stuff inside quick." I watched, barely breathing, as they unloaded several large duffel bags from the truck. They moved with a sense of urgency, glancing around nervously as they worked. As they opened the cabin door, light spilled out, and I caught a glimpse of what was inside one of the bags. My blood ran cold. Guns. A lot of them. I eased back into my tent, my mind racing. What had I stumbled upon? Gun runners? Drug dealers? Whatever it was, I knew I was in way over my head. I needed to leave, to get as far away from here as possible. But I was trapped. My car was miles away, and in the darkness, with these men around, trying to hike out would be suicide. So I waited, every muscle tense, listening to the muffled voices from the cabin. Occasionally, I heard laughter, the clink of bottles. They were drinking, which somehow made it all even more terrifying. I must have dozed off at some point because the next thing I knew, sunlight was filtering through my tent. The clearing was quiet. Cautiously, I peeked out. The truck was gone. This was my chance. I started packing up my gear as quickly and quietly as I could. Just as I was about to leave, I heard voices again, but these were different, loud, angry. "I'm telling you, someone's been here," a voice shouted. Look at these tracks. My heart stopped. In my haste to leave, I'd been careless. They'd seen signs of my camp. Spread out, another voice commanded. Find them. Panic surged through me. I abandoned my tent, grabbing only my backpack. I ran, no longer caring about noise, just needing to put distance between myself and the cabin. I crashed through the underbrush, branches ripping at my face. I could hear them behind me, shouting to each other. They were gaining. My foot caught on a root, and I went down hard, tumbling down a small slope. Pain shot through my ankle as I tried to stand. Sprained? Maybe broken? I couldn't run. Desperately, I looked around. There, a few feet away, was a fallen tree, its roots creating a small cavity. It was my only chance. I dragged myself over, squeezing into the space. It was tight, dirt and rotting wood pressing in on all sides. I tried to control my breathing, each gasp sounding thunderous in my ears. Footsteps approached, crunching on leaves and twigs. "Where are you, you little rat?" a voice growled, terrifyingly close. I closed my eyes, willing myself to disappear. The footsteps circled my hiding spot once, twice. "Anything?" a voice called from a distance. "Nah," the man near me replied. "Trail goes cold here. Must have doubled back." "All right, regroup at the cabin. We need to move everything now." The footsteps receded. Still, I didn't move. I don't know how long I lay there, every sound making me flinch, hours maybe. When I finally gathered the courage to peek out, the forest was quiet. No voices, no footsteps, just the normal sounds of birds and wind in the trees. Slowly, painfully, I extracted myself from the hiding spot. My whole body ached, my ankle throbbing, but I was alive. I limped through the forest, only vaguely aware of which direction I was going. My only thought was to put as much distance between myself and that cabin as possible. As the day wore on, my pace slowed. My ankle was swollen, each step agony. The forest seemed to go on forever, trees blurring together in a green haze. Just as despair was starting to set in, I heard it, the faint sound of running water. A stream. And where there was a stream, there might be a trail. I followed the sound, hope giving me a second wind. And there it was, a small stream, and beside it, a narrow but clear trail. I wanted to cry with relief. I started down the trail, my steps a little lighter despite the pain. As I walked, I started to hear something else, voices. But not the harsh, angry voices from before. These were light, cheerful, the sound of laughter. I rounded a bend, and there they were, a family, 2 parents and a couple of kids, setting up camp by the stream. They looked up as I approached, their smiles fading to concern as they took in my appearance. "Are you all right?" the father asked, already moving toward me. I opened my mouth to reply, but no words came out. Instead, to my horror and embarrassment, I burst into tears. The next few hours passed in a blur. The family, the Johnsons, were on a weekend camping trip. They gave me food, water, and first aid for my ankle. Mr. Johnson used a satellite phone to call for help. As we waited for the rangers to arrive, I told them a version of what had happened, leaving out the parts about guns and being chased. I said I'd gotten lost and hurt my ankle. They were sympathetic, the kids wide-eyed at my adventure. When the rangers finally arrived, I was taken to a small clinic in the nearest town. As a paramedic checked my ankle, a police officer came to take my statement. This time, I told the whole story, the cabin, the men, the guns, the chase. The officer's face grew increasingly serious as I spoke. "You're lucky to be alive," he said when I finished. "We've been trying to track down this group for months. They're part of a large weapons smuggling operation." He asked me more questions, writing rapidly in his notebook. When he was done, he assured me they would investigate immediately. "We'll need you to stay in town for a few days," he said, "just until we can verify everything." I nodded, too exhausted to argue. As he left, a nurse came in with some painkillers. As they started to take effect, I felt myself drifting off. In my dreams, I was back in the forest, running from unseen pursuers. But this time, there was no hiding place, no fallen tree to crawl under. I woke with a start, my heart pounding. It took me a moment to remember where I was. The small clinic room was dark, moonlight streaming through the window. I was safe. But as I lay there, listening to the quiet beep of machines and the soft footsteps of nurses in the hallway, I knew something had changed. The forest, once a place of peace and refuge, now held a darker meaning. I thought about the hike I'd planned, the solitude I'd craved. It seemed naive now, almost laughable. In seeking to escape the complexities of city life, I'd stumbled into a nightmare far worse than anything I'd left behind. As I drifted back to sleep, one thought kept circling in my mind: sometimes, the real dangers aren't in the world we're trying to escape, but in the one we're running toward. And paradise, I'd learned, can hide the darkest secrets of all. The stench hit me before I even opened the door. In that moment, I knew this wasn't going to be a routine welfare check. But nothing could have prepared me for the horror that awaited inside that isolated farmhouse. My name is Sarah, and I've been a social worker for over a decade. I've seen my fair share of difficult situations: abuse, neglect, poverty, but what I encountered that day shook me to my core. It started like any other case. A concerned neighbor had called, reporting that they hadn't seen the Johnson family in days. The Johnsons were a quiet bunch: mom, dad, and 2 kids. They lived on a small farm about an hour outside the city, keeping to themselves mostly. It wasn't unusual for rural families to go days without seeing neighbors, but something about this call felt different. As I drove down the long, dusty road leading to the farmhouse, an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. The usually picturesque countryside seemed ominous, shadows stretching long in the late afternoon sun. I tried to shake off the feeling, chalking it up to an overactive imagination. I pulled up to the house, gravel crunching under my tires. The place looked wrong: curtains drawn tight, no sign of the usual farm activity. The old pickup truck that was always parked out front was missing. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of my car. The air was thick and still, not even a breeze to rustle the overgrown grass. As I approached the porch, I noticed scratch marks on the front door, deep gouges in the wood, as if someone or something had been desperately trying to get in or out. I knocked, the sound echoing ominously. "Hello? Mr. and Mrs. Johnson? It's Sarah from Social Services, just here for a check-in." No response. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. Protocol dictated that I should leave if no one answered, but something kept me there, call it intuition or foolishness, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I tried the door handle. To my surprise, it turned easily. As the door swung open, that coppery smell hit me full force. I gagged, my hand flying to my mouth. "Hello?" I called out again, my voice shaky. "Is anyone home?" Silence greeted me, broken only by the creak of floorboards under my feet as I stepped inside. The interior of the house was dark, curtains drawn against the fading daylight. As my eyes adjusted, I saw signs of a struggle: a lamp lay shattered on the floor, a chair overturned. And then I saw the blood. It was everywhere, splattered across the walls, pooled on the hardwood floor. My heart raced, every instinct screaming at me to run. But I couldn't. If there was any chance someone was still alive, I had to find them. I moved deeper into the house, my shoes sticking slightly to the tacky floor. The living room was a disaster: furniture overturned, picture frames smashed. Whatever had happened here, it had been violent. As I approached the kitchen, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A soft whimper, barely audible. It was coming from upstairs. "Hello?" I called out louder now. "Is someone there?" "I'm here to help." Another whimper, slightly louder this time, definitely human. I made my way to the stairs, my hands shaking as I gripped the banister. Each step creaked under my weight, the sound impossibly loud in the silent house. At the top of the stairs, I paused. The blood trail continued, leading down the hallway to a closed door at the end. The whimpering was clearer now, punctuated by soft sobs. I approached the door slowly, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "I'm coming in," I announced, my voice barely above a whisper. I turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room was dark, but I could make out a small figure huddled in the corner. As my eyes adjusted, I saw it was a child, a little girl, no more than 6 or 7. "Hey there," I said softly, trying to keep my voice calm despite the terror coursing through me. "My name's Sarah. I'm here to help. Are you hurt?" The girl looked up, her eyes wide with fear. She was covered in blood, her blonde hair matted with it. But as I looked closer, I realized with relief that she didn't appear to be injured. The blood wasn't hers. I took a step toward her, and she flinched. "It's okay," I soothed. "I'm not going to hurt you. Can you tell me your name?" "Lucy," she stammered. "My name is Lucy." "Hi, Lucy," I said, kneeling down to her level. "Can you tell me what happened? Where are your parents?" At the mention of her parents, Lucy's face crumpled. She began to sob in earnest, her small body shaking. I moved closer, fighting every instinct that was telling me to grab the child and run. "It's okay, sweetie. You're safe now. Can you tell me where your parents are?" Lucy pointed a trembling finger toward the closet. My gaze followed, and I noticed for the first time that the closet door was slightly ajar. A dark liquid was seeping out from under it, spreading across the carpet. My stomach lurched. I knew what I would find, but I had to be sure. "Lucy," I said, my voice as steady as I could make it. "I need you to close your eyes for me, okay? And keep them closed until I say it's all right to open them. Can you do that for me?" She nodded, squeezing her eyes shut tight. I stood up on shaky legs and approached the closet. The smell was overwhelming now. I reached for the door handle, took a deep breath, and pulled it open. What I saw will haunt me for the rest of my days. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson were there, or what was left of them. Their bodies were mutilated beyond recognition, and there, huddled between them, was a little boy, Lucy's brother. His eyes were open, staring blankly. He'd been dead for days. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. I managed to close the door before I lost the contents of my stomach on the bedroom floor. As I wiped my mouth, my mind raced. What could have done this? It looked like an animal attack, but no animal I knew of could have caused this level of devastation. And how had Lucy survived? I turned back to the little girl, still huddled in the corner with her eyes squeezed shut. I needed to get her out of here, now. "Lucy," I said, my voice hoarse. "You can open your eyes now. We're going to leave, okay? I'm going to take you somewhere safe." She nodded, her eyes fluttering open. I held out my hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. As we made our way downstairs, I pulled out my phone to call the police. No signal, of course. We stepped outside, the fresh air a blessed relief from the horror inside. I led Lucy to my car, helping her into the back seat. As I closed the door, I heard something that made my heart stop, a low, guttural growl. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the overgrown field beside the house. There, at the edge of the tall grass, I saw movement, something large, moving on all fours. In the fading light, I caught a glimpse of matted fur, long, sharp claws, and eyes glowing in the twilight, fixed directly on me. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I just moved. I yanked open the driver's door, threw myself inside, and turned the key. The engine roared to life just as the creature burst from the grass, charging toward us. I slammed the car into reverse, tires spinning in the gravel. In the rearview mirror, I saw it gaining on us, impossibly fast. Its jaws were open, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. We hit the road, and I shifted into drive, flooring the accelerator. The creature was right behind us, so close I could hear its claws scraping against the trunk. "Hold on, Lucy!" I shouted, swerving to try to shake it off. For miles, it chased us. Every time I thought we'd lost it, I'd catch a glimpse of it in the mirror, tireless, relentless. It wasn't until we hit the main road, other cars appearing around us, that it finally fell back. As we sped toward the city, the lights appearing on the horizon, I allowed myself to breathe. Lucy was curled up in the back seat, silent. I glanced back at her, this tiny survivor of unimaginable horror. "It's okay," I said, trying to convince myself as much as her. "We're safe now." But as I drove through the night, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, I knew that wasn't true. We had escaped, yes. But safety? That was an illusion that had been shattered forever. Whatever that thing was, it was still out there. And as the adrenaline faded and the reality of what I'd seen began to sink in, I realized that my life and Lucy's would never be the same. The quiet countryside I'd driven through just hours ago now seemed full of shadows, of hidden dangers. And I knew that from this night forward, every darkness would hold the potential for terror, every silence the promise of that bone-chilling growl. As we drove into the city, the familiar skyline offering little comfort, I made a silent vow. I would protect Lucy. I would find out what happened to her family. And somehow, someday, I would make sense of the nightmare we'd lived through. But deep down, I knew some horrors can't be explained. Some terrors don't end when the sun rises. And sometimes, the monsters that hide in the shadows are all too real. The day I stopped a child trafficking ring started like any other shift at the beach, but by sunset, I'd stared evil in the face and realized that monsters don't always hide in the shadows. Sometimes, they walk among us in broad daylight. My name's Mike, and I've been a lifeguard at Sunset Beach for 5 summers now. It's usually a pretty sweet gig of sun, sand, and the occasional heroic rescue to impress the ladies. But nothing in my training prepared me for what happened that scorching July afternoon. The day began normally enough. I climbed up to my perch on the lifeguard tower, slathered on sunscreen, and surveyed my domain. The beach was already packed, families staking out spots with colorful umbrellas and coolers, kids shrieking with laughter as they splashed in the shallows, while teenagers showed off on surfboards farther out. Around midday, I noticed a group of men arrive. There were 4 of them, all in their late 30s or early 40s. Something about them seemed off from the get-go. They were dressed too nicely for the beach, button-up shirts and pressed khakis instead of swim trunks and tank tops. And unlike everyone else soaking up the sun, they huddled together in the shade of a large umbrella. At first, I tried to brush off my unease. Maybe they were just some businessmen on lunch break, enjoying the view. But as the afternoon wore on, their behavior grew increasingly suspicious. They never went near the water or even took off their shoes. Instead, they sat rigid in their chairs, eyes constantly scanning the beach. Every so often, one would mutter something to the others, who'd nod gravely in response. But what really set off alarm bells was the way they watched the children. Their gazes followed kids as they ran past, lingering a bit too long. One man had a camera and seemed to be taking an awful lot of photos in the direction of the playground. Another kept checking his watch and muttering about the schedule. A chill ran down my spine despite the sweltering heat. I'd seen my fair share of creeps on the beach before, but this felt different, more organized, more sinister. I radioed my supervisor, Jake, and shared my concerns. "Keep an eye on them," he advised. "But don't engage unless you see them actually do something. We can't accuse people without proof." I nodded, but my gut twisted with unease. What if waiting for proof meant a child disappeared? As the afternoon progressed, the men's behavior grew bolder. They split up, each taking a different section of the beach. It was like they were creating a perimeter. One positioned himself near the snack bar, another by the restrooms, while the other 2 lingered near the main entrances. My heart raced as I realized what they were doing. They were cutting off escape routes. I scanned the beach frantically, looking for any kids who might be in immediate danger. That's when I spotted her, a little girl, maybe 6 or 7, building a sandcastle near the water's edge. She was just out of her mother's line of sight, who was distracted, chatting with a friend. And one of the men was walking straight toward her. Time seemed to slow down. I saw his lips move as he knelt beside her, pointing out toward the water as if showing her something. The girl smiled, nodding eagerly. He held out his hand. I didn't think, I just moved. I leaped down from my tower and sprinted across the sand, my whistle between my teeth. I blew it hard as I ran, the shrill sound cutting through the beach noise. "Hey!" I shouted as I neared them. "Step away from the child." The man's head snapped up, his eyes widening in surprise, then narrowing in anger. He dropped the girl's hand and bolted. I wanted to chase him, but the girl's safety came first. I skidded to a stop beside her as her mother came running over, alerted by my whistle. "What's going on?" she demanded, scooping up her daughter. "Ma'am, I need you to stay with your child and alert a staff member if you see that man again," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He may have been trying to abduct her. The color drained from her face as she clutched her daughter tighter. I didn't wait for a response, already scanning the beach for the other suspects. They were on the move, clearly realizing their cover was blown. I saw one making a beeline for the parking lot, while another was quickly packing up their belongings. I grabbed my radio. "Jake, it's Mike. Those men I told you about, they just tried to lure a child away. I think we're dealing with traffickers. We need to lock down the beach now." Jake's response was immediate. "Copy that. I'm calling the police. Don't approach them alone, Mike. These guys could be dangerous." But I was already running toward the parking lot, determination overriding caution. I couldn't let them get away, not when children's lives were at stake. I reached the lot just as one of the men was climbing into a dark SUV. Without thinking, I grabbed a beach umbrella from a nearby stand and hurled it like a javelin. It crashed through the SUV's back window, startling the man enough that he stalled the engine. I used those precious seconds to close the distance, yanking open the driver's side door. "Out of the car!" I yelled, grabbing his arm. He swung at me, his fist connecting with my jaw. Stars exploded in my vision, but adrenaline kept me upright. I tackled him, both of us tumbling onto the asphalt. We grappled there in the parking lot, trading blows. He was stronger than I expected, but I had youth and righteous anger on my side. I managed to pin him down just as sirens wailed in the distance. "It's over," I panted, tasting blood. "The cops are coming. You're done." His eyes blazed with hatred. "You have no idea what you've done," he spat. The police arrived moments later, quickly taking control of the situation. As they cuffed the man I'd subdued, I saw two of his compatriots being led away in handcuffs as well. The fourth, unfortunately, had managed to escape in the chaos. The next few hours passed in a blur of questioning and statements. The police praised my quick thinking but admonished me for putting myself in danger. I barely heard them, my mind reeling as the full impact of what had almost happened sank in. These men had been methodically planning to snatch children from right under our noses. How long had they been operating? How many kids had they already taken from other beaches, other towns? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the now empty beach, a detective pulled me aside. "You did good work today, son," he said gravely. "We've been trying to crack this trafficking ring for months. Thanks to you, we finally got some solid leads." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. "Those kids," I managed to ask. "Will they be okay?" The detective's expression softened. "The ones here today, yes. Thanks to you. But there are others out there who still need saving. This is bigger than just one beach, I'm afraid." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I looked out over the darkening water, thinking of all the children who might be out there, scared and alone. And I made a decision. "How can I help?" I asked, turning back to the detective. "I want to do more." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "We could use someone with your instincts and dedication. It won't be easy, and it's sure as hell not as glamorous as being a lifeguard. But if you're serious, come down to the station tomorrow. We'll talk." That night, as I lay in bed replaying the day's events, I knew my life had changed irrevocably. The beach I'd loved, the job I'd enjoyed, they suddenly seemed trivial in the face of the darkness I'd glimpsed. I thought of that little girl, of how close she'd come to being snatched away from everything she knew and loved. And I thought of all the other children out there who might not be as lucky. Sleep eluded me as I wrestled with the weight of my new knowledge. The world suddenly seemed a much darker, more dangerous place. But as I watched the first rays of dawn creep across my ceiling, I felt a steely resolve settle in my chest. I couldn't unsee what I'd witnessed. I couldn't unhear that man's chilling words. But I could use this experience, this anger and determination, to make a difference. As I got up to face the new day, I knew my time as a carefree lifeguard was over. A different kind of vigilance was needed now. The monsters were real, hiding in plain sight, and someone had to stand against them. Today, I'd stop being just a guardian of the beach. I'd become a guardian of innocence itself. And God help anyone who tried to harm a child on my watch again. I never thought a dusty old box would be the key to unlocking a world of danger and intrigue, but as I crouched in the shadows, listening to the voices of ruthless smugglers, I realized that some treasures are better left buried. My name is Dr. Amelia Carter, and I'm an archaeologist specializing in ancient Egyptian artifacts. I've spent years studying hieroglyphs and piecing together the mysteries of the past, but nothing in my studies could have prepared me for the heart-pounding adventure that began on a sweltering day in the Valley of the Kings. It was my third season working on a dig site near Luxor. The heat was oppressive, the sun beating down mercilessly as my team and I carefully excavated a promising area. We'd been at it for weeks, unearthing pottery shards and the occasional bit of jewelry, but nothing extraordinary. That all changed when my trowel hit something solid. "Hey, guys!" I called out, excitement bubbling in my voice. "I think I've found something." My colleagues gathered around as I carefully brushed away the sand. Slowly, the object began to take shape, a small wooden box, intricately carved with symbols I didn't recognize. "Dr. Carter," my assistant Tom whispered in awe, "this doesn't look like anything we've seen before." He was right. The box didn't fit with the time period we were excavating. It was older, much older, and far better preserved than it should have been. With trembling hands, I lifted the box from its resting place. It was surprisingly heavy for its size, and I could hear something shifting inside. "Let's get this back to the lab," I said, cradling the box like a newborn. "We need to document everything before we open it." Back at our makeshift lab, we carefully photographed and measured the box. The hieroglyphs were unlike any I'd seen before, a mixture of known symbols and completely foreign ones. It was maddening. I could almost understand it, but crucial pieces were missing. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the desert, we finally prepared to open the box. My heart raced as I carefully lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like silk, were several small artifacts: a golden scarab beetle with eyes made of deep red gems, a set of small tools whose purpose was unclear, and, most intriguingly, a collection of papyrus scrolls, miraculously preserved. "This is incredible," I breathed, carefully unrolling one of the scrolls. The writing was crisp and clear, as if it had been penned yesterday instead of thousands of years ago. This could change everything we know about ancient Egyptian culture. We worked late into the night, cataloging and photographing each item. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning that I finally collapsed into my cot, my mind whirling with the possibilities this discovery presented. The next few days were a blur of excitement and research. We kept the find under wraps, not wanting to alert the media until we had a better understanding of what we were dealing with. But as I delved deeper into translating the scrolls, a sense of unease began to grow. The text spoke of hidden temples, of rituals and powers that defied explanation, and, more worryingly, of a group dedicated to protecting these secrets at all costs. It was on the fifth night after our discovery that things took a dark turn. I was working late in the lab, poring over one of the scrolls, when I heard voices outside, angry voices, speaking in hushed tones. Curiosity got the better of me. I crept to the window, peeking out from behind the curtain. What I saw made my blood run cold. Two men, dressed in dark clothes, were arguing with one of our local workers. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but their body language was clear: they were threatening him. I watched, heart pounding, as they pressed something into the worker's hand, money, I assumed, and then melted back into the shadows. Sleep eluded me that night. Who were those men? What did they want? A part of me hoped it was unrelated to our discovery, but deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I pulled Tom aside. "We need to be careful," I told him, recounting what I'd seen. "I think someone might be after the artifacts." Tom's face paled. "What do we do? Should we tell the authorities?" I shook my head. "Not yet. We don't know who we can trust. For now, let's just keep everything under tight security. Don't let anyone near the artifacts unless I'm present. Despite our precautions, the atmosphere at the dig site changed. I felt eyes on me constantly. Whispered conversations would stop abruptly when I approached. And then items started to go missing, small things at first, a notebook here, a tool there, but it was enough to set me on edge. It all came to a head a week later. I was working late again, trying to decipher a particularly tricky passage in one of the scrolls. The lab was quiet, everyone else having retired for the night. A noise outside made me jump, footsteps, trying to be quiet but failing in the stillness of the night. I quickly turned off my lamp and ducked behind a large crate, my heart thundering in my chest. The door creaked open. Two figures slipped inside, their faces obscured by the darkness. They moved with purpose, heading straight for the safe where we kept the artifacts. "Hurry up," one of them hissed. "We need to get this done before anyone notices." I watched in horror as they expertly cracked the safe, pulling out the box and its precious contents. They worked quickly, transferring everything into a backpack. I must have made a noise, a gasp, a shifting of my weight, because suddenly, one of them whirled around, peering into the darkness where I hid. "Someone's here," he growled. I didn't wait. I bolted, knocking over equipment in my haste to get to the door. Behind me, I heard shouts and the sound of pursuit. I ran into the night, the cool desert air whipping past me. I had no plan, no destination in mind, just an overwhelming need to get away and protect the knowledge we'd uncovered. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but fear drove me forward. Eventually, I found myself in a small grove of trees, an oasis in the desert. Collapsing behind a large rock, I tried to catch my breath and think. What could I do? Who could I trust? As if an answer to my unspoken questions, I heard the rumble of an approaching vehicle. Peering out from my hiding spot, I saw a jeep pull up. Relief surged through me as Tom jumped out, looking frantic. "Dr. Carter," he called out. "Are you here?" "It's me, Tom." "You're in danger." Relief gave way to suspicion. How had he found me so quickly? I stumbled out from behind the rock, still wary. "Tom, thank God," I said, my voice shaking. "They took the artifacts." "We need to." My words died in my throat. Emerging from the jeep behind Tom were the two men I'd seen in the lab. My heart sank as understanding dawned. Tom's face was a mask of regret. "I'm so sorry, Dr. Carter," he said, his voice heavy with guilt. "They have my family. I didn't have a choice." I backed away, my mind reeling with betrayal. But there was nowhere to run. The men approached, their expressions grim. "Dr. Carter," one of them said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "We don't want to hurt you, but you've stumbled onto something bigger than you can imagine, something that needs to stay hidden." "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "We're keepers of an ancient secret," the other man replied. "The artifacts you found, they're part of something dangerous, something that could upset the balance of the world if it fell into the wrong hands." I wanted to laugh. It sounded absurd, like something out of a movie. But the gravity in their eyes, the way Tom wouldn't meet my gaze, it made a horrifying kind of sense. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The first man sighed. "Now, you have a choice. You can come with us, learn the truth about what you've discovered, and help us protect it. Or..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. The implication was clear. I looked at Tom, at the artifacts peeking out of the backpack, at the vast desert around us. In that moment, I realized that the quiet life I'd known, the simple pursuit of knowledge, was over. I took a deep breath. "I'll come with you," I said. "But I want answers, all of them." The men nodded, relief evident on their faces. As they led me to the jeep, I cast one last look at the dig site in the distance, the place where my old life had ended, and a new, dangerous chapter had begun. As we drove off into the night, the box of artifacts secure between us, I couldn't help but wonder, in uncovering the secrets of the past, had I sealed my own fate? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain, the dusty world of archaeology would never be the same for me again. I always thought I was a good judge of character. But on that rainy night, as the stranger in my passenger seat revealed his true nature, I realized how deadly wrong I could be. My name's Sarah, and I've been driving for a rideshare company for about a year now. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills and lets me meet all sorts of interesting people, or so I thought, before that fateful night. It was a Friday evening in late October, the kind of night where the rain comes down in sheets, turning the world into a blur of neon reflections and headlights. I'd been driving for hours, ferrying drunk college kids and weary office workers through the slick streets of downtown. I was just about to call it quits when my phone pinged with one last ride request. The pickup location was on the outskirts of town, near an old industrial park. Not the safest area, but the surge pricing was too good to pass up. Besides, I told myself, what were the odds of something bad happening on my very last ride? As I pulled up to the address, I saw a lone figure standing under a flickering streetlight. He was tall and lean, wearing a dark hoodie pulled low over his face. A small duffel bag was slung over his shoulder. I hesitated for a moment, every instinct screaming at me to drive away. But then I remembered all the times I'd been judged unfairly based on my appearance. Who was I to do the same to this guy? I unlocked the doors, and he slid into the back seat, bringing with him the smell of rain and something else I couldn't quite place. "Thanks for stopping," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Not many people would pick up a guy like me in this part of town." I forced a smile, meeting his eyes in the rearview mirror. They were dark and intense, sending a shiver down my spine. "No problem," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where to?" He gave me an address about an hour outside of town. It was way out of my usual area, but the fare would be substantial. I punched it into my GPS and pulled away from the curb. For the first few minutes, we drove in silence, the only sounds the rhythmic swish of the wipers and the patter of rain on the roof. I tried to focus on the road, but I could feel his eyes on me, watching my every move. "So," I said, desperate to break the tension, "what brings you out to the middle of nowhere on a night like this?" He was quiet for so long I thought he hadn't heard me. When he finally spoke, his words sent ice through my veins. "I'm running from something," he said. "Something bad." I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. "Oh," I managed to squeak out. "Like what?" He leaned forward, his breath hot on my ear. "The police," he whispered. "And I've done something terrible. They're after me." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. I tried to keep my voice calm. What did you do?" He sat back, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Why don't you pull over, and I'll show you?" Every instinct I had was screaming at me to floor it, to get as far away from this man as possible. But we were on a deserted stretch of highway, trees looming on either side. There was nowhere to go. I don't think that's a good idea," I stammered. "Maybe I should just take you to your destination." His hand shot out, gripping my shoulder with surprising strength. "Pull over. Now." I did as he said, easing the car onto the muddy shoulder. As soon as we stopped, he was out of the car, moving around to my door. I fumbled with the lock, but he was faster, yanking the door open and dragging me out into the rain. I stumbled, falling to my knees in the mud. When I looked up, he was standing over me, a wicked-looking knife glinting in his hand. "Please," I begged, rain and tears mingling on my face. "You don't have to do this." He crouched down, bringing the knife close to my cheek. "Oh, but I do," he said, almost tenderly. "You see, I can't have any witnesses. And you, my dear, have seen far too much." I closed my eyes, waiting for the bite of the blade. But instead, I heard a sound that made my eyes fly open in shock. Laughter. The man was laughing deep, belly laughs that shook his whole body. Then, to my utter disbelief, he helped me to my feet. "Oh, man," he said, wiping tears from his eyes. "You should see your face right now. Priceless." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process what was happening. "What's going on?" He grinned, all traces of menace gone from his face. It's a prank, sweetheart. For my YouTube channel. See? He pointed to a small camera attached to his hoodie. You've been punked. I stood there in the rain, staring at him, my heart still racing, adrenaline coursing through my veins. It took a moment for his words to sink in. A prank? I repeated, my voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and fury. Yeah, pretty good, huh? He said, his grin widening. The whole dangerous stranger act always gets people. He chuckled, clearly proud of himself. I didn't feel relief. I felt rage. My hands clenched into fists as I glared at him. You think this is funny? You scared me half to death. He shrugged, completely unfazed. Come on, lighten up. It's just a joke. People love this stuff online. It'll probably go viral. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, but it was no use. You think terrorizing someone is a joke? You think making them fear for their life is entertainment? His grin faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. Hey, no harm, no foul, right? You're fine. It's all in good fun. No, I said, my voice cold. It's not fine. You don't get to decide what's fun when you're messing with other people's lives. He rolled his eyes, clearly tired of my outrage. Look, if you're gonna be this dramatic, maybe you're in the wrong line of work. Driving people around? You're bound to meet some weirdos. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, the sound of an approaching car caught my attention. Headlights cut through the rain as a police cruiser pulled up behind us. The man's cocky demeanor vanished in an instant. Oh, crap, he muttered, glancing nervously at the knife still in his hand. Two officers stepped out of the cruiser, their hands resting on their holstered guns. Everything all right here, one of them called out, his eyes darting between me and the man. I didn't hesitate. No, officer, I said, my voice steady despite the shaking in my limbs. This man just threatened me with a knife. Whoa, hold on, the man exclaimed, raising his hands. It's not what it looks like. It was just a prank. The officers exchanged a look before one of them stepped forward. A prank? Care to explain that knife, then? It's a prop, the man insisted. For my YouTube channel. I was filming a prank video. Ask her. He pointed at me, desperation creeping into his voice. The officer looked at me, his expression unreadable. Is that true, ma'am? I hesitated for a fraction of a second, then shook my head. No, officer. He told me he was running from the police and pulled me out of my car. I thought he was going to kill me. The man's eyes widened in shock. What? No, that's not what happened. She's lying. The officers didn't seem convinced. One of them stepped forward, grabbing the man's arm and pulling it behind his back. You're under arrest for assault and making terroristic threats, he said, snapping a pair of handcuffs onto his wrists. You can't do this, the man protested as they led him toward the cruiser. It was a prank. A joke. Check the footage. One of the officers retrieved the camera from the man's hoodie and handed it to his partner. We'll see about that. As they loaded him into the back of the cruiser, one of the officers turned to me. Are you okay, ma'am? Do you need medical attention? I'm fine, I said, though my voice wavered. Just shaken up. He nodded sympathetically. We'll need you to come down to the station to file a report. I agreed, glancing at the man one last time as they drove him away. His expression was a mixture of anger and disbelief, but I felt no sympathy. Later, as I sat in the station recounting the events of the night, the absurdity of it all began to sink in. A prank had turned into a nightmare, and the man's arrogance had cost him dearly. When I finally got home in the early hours of the morning, I collapsed onto my couch, exhausted but grateful to be safe. As I replayed the night in my mind, I made a decision: no more late-night rides in sketchy areas. Some fares just aren't worth the risk. And as for that so-called prankster? I hoped he learned an important lesson: terrorizing people isn't a joke. Sometimes, it has real consequences. I've always loved hiking. The peace, the fresh air, the feeling of being miles away from the chaos of everyday life. It's where I've always felt most at home. But after what happened on my last trip, I don't think I'll ever set foot on a trail again. It started as a weekend getaway, just me and my best friend, Claire. We'd been planning it for weeks, a 2-day hike through Red Pine National Park. The park was famous for its dense forests, stunning views, and, most importantly, its solitude. That's exactly what we were looking for, a break from the noise of the city and a chance to reconnect with nature. We arrived early Saturday morning, the sky a brilliant blue, the air crisp and cool. Shouldering our packs, we set off on the trail, laughing and chatting as we made our way deeper into the woods. The first day was perfect. The trail wound through towering pines and across crystal-clear streams. We stopped for lunch on a rocky outcrop with a breathtaking view of the valley below. By the time we reached our campsite for the night, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting the forest in shades of orange and gold. We set up our tent, cooked a simple dinner over a campfire, and spent the evening stargazing. It was everything we'd hoped for. But as the fire died down and we crawled into the tent, a strange unease settled over me. I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was the unfamiliar sounds of the forest at night, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustling of leaves in the breeze, or maybe it was something deeper, an instinctual feeling that something wasn't right. I told myself I was being silly and tried to ignore it. Claire was already asleep, her breathing soft and steady, and I didn't want to wake her. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I drifted off. I woke sometime later to a sound that froze me in place, a low, guttural growl, so deep it seemed to vibrate the very ground beneath me. My heart pounded as I strained to listen. Was it a bear? A mountain lion? I reached over and shook Claire awake. Did you hear that? I whispered. Hear what? She mumbled, still half asleep. Another growl cut through the silence, closer this time. Claire bolted upright, her eyes wide with fear. That, I said, my voice trembling. We sat there in the darkness, listening. The growl came again, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps crunching through the underbrush. Whatever it was big and it was getting closer. Should we run? Claire whispered. I shook my head. No. If it's a bear, running will just make it chase us. We need to stay calm. But staying calm was easier said than done. The footsteps stopped just outside our tent. I held my breath, every muscle tensed, waiting for whatever was out there to make its move. Suddenly, the tent shook violently, as if something had slammed into it. Claire let out a scream, and I grabbed the only weapon we had, a small camping knife. Go away! I shouted, hoping to scare it off. The growl turned into a low, menacing laugh. My blood turned to ice. Animals don't laugh. Hello in there, a voice said, deep and mocking. Are you lost? I glanced at Claire, her face pale in the dim light of our lantern. Who's out there? I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. The voice chuckled. Just someone passing through. You girls shouldn't be out here all alone. It's not safe. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. This wasn't some random hiker. His tone, his words, they were meant to intimidate. Leave us alone, I said, gripping the knife tightly. Oh, I don't think so, he replied, his voice closer now. I think we're just getting started. The next moments were a blur. The man began circling the tent, his heavy boots crunching the ground. Claire and I huddled together, trying to come up with a plan. On the count of 3, I whispered, we run for the car. But what if he? We have to try, I said firmly. 1, 2, 3. We burst out of the tent and into the night, the cold air hitting us like a slap. I could barely see, the trees towering above us blocking out the moonlight. But I didn't stop. I grabbed Claire's hand, pulling her along as we sprinted through the forest. Behind us, the man shouted, his voice filled with rage. I risked a glance back and saw his silhouette chasing us, something glinting in his hand. Was it a knife? Keep running. I yelled, adrenaline the only thing keeping me moving. We ran blindly through the forest, branches slashing at our faces and arms, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. My heart pounded in my chest as the man's shouts grew louder, closer. I could hear his heavy footsteps crashing through the underbrush, relentless in his pursuit. I didn't know how far we'd gone or where we were headed, all that mattered was getting away. The terrain was uneven, roots and rocks hidden beneath the blanket of darkness. Claire stumbled, nearly pulling me down with her, but I caught her arm and yanked her back to her feet. "Come on," I urged, my voice barely audible over the sound of our frantic flight. Suddenly, the ground beneath me seemed to vanish. I cried out as we tumbled down a steep incline, the world spinning as we rolled. When we finally came to a stop, my body was bruised and aching, but we were alive. I groaned, struggling to sit up. "Claire," I whispered hoarsely. "Are you okay?" "Yeah," she said shakily, crawling toward me. "I think so. Where are we?" I looked around, trying to get my bearings. We'd landed in a narrow ravine, the wall steep and jagged. It was darker here, the trees above forming a dense canopy that blocked out what little light the moon provided. For a moment, there was silence, no shouts, no footsteps. Maybe we'd lost him. "Do you think?" Claire began, but I cut her off with a sharp gesture. I heard it again, the sound of boots crunching above us. My stomach dropped. He was still searching, and he was close. "We need to hide," I whispered, grabbing Claire's arm. "Now." We scrambled to our feet, ignoring the pain and exhaustion. The ravine offered little in the way of cover, but further down, I spotted a cluster of boulders. We hurried toward them, squeezing into the narrow space between two massive rocks. The air was damp and cold, the scent of moss and earth filling my nose. We crouched there, holding our breaths as the footsteps drew nearer. The man's voice called out, his tone eerily calm now. "You can't hide forever, girls," he taunted, his words echoing through the ravine. "I'll find you. And when I do." He let the threat hang in the air, unfinished. I pressed myself closer to the rock, willing myself to disappear. Beside me, Claire was trembling, her hand clutching mine in a death grip. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they seemed to be right above us. I bit down on my lip, stifling a sob. This was it, he was going to find us. But then, just as suddenly as he'd appeared, the footsteps moved away. His voice faded, swallowed by the forest. We stayed frozen in place, too terrified to move, for what felt like hours. Finally, when the silence stretched on, I dared to whisper, "I think he's gone." Claire nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "What do we do now?" "We head for the road," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Quietly. Carefully. We can't stay here." We climbed out from behind the boulders, every sound seeming deafening in the stillness. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself to keep moving. The forest seemed endless, the darkness pressing in on all sides. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves, set my nerves on edge. After what felt like an eternity, I spotted something through the trees, a faint glimmer of light. My heart leapt. The road. It had to be. "Look," I whispered, pointing. "We're almost there." We quickened our pace, hope giving us a surge of energy. As we broke through the tree line, the sight of the empty highway stretched out before us felt like a miracle. We ran onto the asphalt, gasping for air, relief flooding through us. But our relief was short-lived. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance, growing brighter as the vehicle approached. I grabbed Claire's hand, pulling her toward the edge of the road. "Wait," she said, her voice panicked. "What if it's him?" I hesitated. She was right, it could be him. But we couldn't stay out here, vulnerable in the open. The vehicle slowed as it neared us, and I braced myself, my pulse racing. The car came to a stop, the driver's window rolling down. A man in his late 40s leaned out, his face etched with concern. "Are you two okay?" he asked. "What are you doing out here?" Relief washed over me, so strong it nearly brought me to my knees. "We need help," I said, my voice breaking. "There's someone chasing us." He's trying to hurt us. The man's expression darkened. Get in. I'll take you to the nearest ranger station. Without hesitation, we climbed into the car, locking the doors behind us. As the man drove off, I glanced out the window, half expecting to see the silhouette of our pursuer emerging from the trees. But the forest remained still, the shadow swallowing whatever nightmare we'd left behind. The drive to the ranger station felt like a blur, the adrenaline slowly fading and leaving behind a hollow exhaustion. The man, who introduced himself as Daniel, didn't press us for details. He simply kept the car steady on the winding road, his calm presence a stark contrast to the chaos we'd just escaped. Claire sat beside me, silent and pale, clutching her knees to her chest. I stared out the window, watching the dark forest slip past, half expecting the man from the woods to burst onto the road at any moment. Every time headlights appeared in the rearview mirror, my breath hitched, but the cars always passed without incident. When we finally arrived at the ranger station, it was a modest structure tucked into the edge of the forest. Its lights glowed warmly, a beacon of safety in the night. Daniel pulled up to the front and parked. Go inside, he said firmly. I'll wait here in case you need anything else. We thanked him, our voices shaky, and hurried into the station. The ranger on duty, a middle-aged woman named Officer Mills, looked up as we entered. Her expression shifted from surprise to concern as she took in our disheveled appearances. What happened? She asked, rising from her desk. Claire and I took turns explaining, stumbling over our words as we recounted the events of the night. The growls outside our tent. The man who'd chased us through the woods. The threat he'd posed. Officer Mills listened intently, her brow furrowing deeper with each detail. When we finished, she picked up her radio and called for backup, her tone professional but urgent. We'll take this seriously, she assured us. A man threatening hikers in this area is no small matter. We'll organize a search and make sure the surrounding campsites are notified. Relief flooded through me, but it was tinged with unease. The man had been so calculated, so relentless. What if they didn't find him? What if he came back? As if sensing my thoughts, Officer Mills said, for now, you're safe here. I'll make sure you're escorted back to your car in the morning, and we'll keep a close watch on the area. Just try to rest. She led us to a small lounge area with a couch and a couple of chairs. Claire immediately sank onto the couch, her exhaustion catching up with her. I sat beside her, my body heavy with fatigue but my mind still racing. Do you think they'll catch him? Claire asked quietly, her voice trembling. I don't know, I admitted. But at least we're out of the woods. She gave a weak nod, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. Within minutes, she was asleep, her breathing slow and steady. I envied her ability to find peace, even for a little while. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the night's events in my mind. The man's voice echoed in my ears, his mocking laughter and the way he'd stalked us through the darkness. Who was he? Why had he chosen us? Morning came slowly, the first rays of sunlight creeping through the windows. True to her word, Officer Mills arranged for a pair of rangers to escort us back to the trailhead where our car was parked. As we drove, I couldn't help but scan the forest for any sign of the man, but the trees stood silent and empty, revealing nothing. When we finally reached our car, I felt a wave of relief. It was over. We were safe. But as I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, a nagging thought lingered in the back of my mind, had we truly escaped? Or was this just the beginning? Over the next few days, I tried to return to normal life, but the events of that night clung to me like a shadow. Every creak in my apartment, every unexpected knock at the door, sent my heart racing. Sleep came in fits and starts, plagued by nightmares of the man's voice echoing in the darkness. Claire wasn't faring much better. We talked daily, trying to reassure each other, but the fear lingered. She'd started sleeping with her lights on and avoided being outside after dark. Neither of us had gone near a hiking trail since. A week after the incident, Officer Mills called with an update. We've searched the area thoroughly, she said, her tone professional but cautious. We found evidence of someone camping near your site, footprints, discarded items, but no sign of the man you described. So he's still out there, I said, my stomach sinking. We're keeping a close watch on the area, she assured me. But I wanted to warn you, there have been similar reports from other hikers in the past. They described a man matching your description, acting erratically. We believe he may be a drifter, moving from one park to another. Her words offered little comfort. If this man had evaded capture for so long, what were the chances he'd ever be caught? The weeks turned into months, and while the fear dulled, it never disappeared entirely. Claire and I avoided discussing the incident, as if speaking of it would summon him back into our lives. But deep down, I knew we were both waiting for the other shoe to drop. It did one cold December evening. I was home alone, curled up on the couch with a book, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Claire. "Are you awake? Someone's outside my window." My heart skipped a beat. I immediately called her, but it went straight to voicemail. Panic surged through me as I grabbed my keys and ran to my car, dialing 911 as I sped toward her apartment. The dispatcher assured me that officers were on their way, but the drive felt endless. By the time I arrived, the street was swarming with police cars, their lights flashing in the icy darkness. I parked and ran to the nearest officer. "I'm Sarah," I gasped. "Claire called me, what happened? Is she okay?" The officer's face was grim. "We found signs of a break-in, but your friend is missing." The world tilted beneath me. "What do you mean, missing? Where is she?" "We're still investigating," he said gently. "Do you know of anyone who might have a reason to harm her?" I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. My mind was racing, replaying every detail of that night in the woods. "It's him," I finally whispered. "The man from the trail." The officer's eyes narrowed. "Tell me everything." I recounted the entire ordeal, my voice shaking as I described the man and his chilling behavior. The officer listened intently, taking notes. "We'll do everything we can to find your friend," he promised. The next few days were a waking nightmare. I barely slept, barely ate, consumed by guilt and fear. Search parties combed the surrounding area, but there was no sign of Claire. On the 5th day, I received a package in the mail. There was no return address, just my name scrawled in jagged letters across the top. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single item, Claire's necklace, the one she'd been wearing that night in the woods. I sank to the floor, clutching the necklace as tears streamed down my face. The message was clear. He had her. And he wasn't done with me yet. The necklace felt cold and heavy in my hand, a physical manifestation of the nightmare I couldn't escape. I sat there on the floor, staring at it, my mind racing. How had he found her? How had he found me? I called the police immediately, my voice shaking as I told them about the package. They arrived within minutes, treating the package as evidence and promising to escalate the investigation. But their reassurances felt hollow. I'd already seen how elusive this man could be. Days turned into weeks, and the search for Claire continued with no breakthroughs. I withdrew from everything: work, friends, even my family, plagued by a growing sense of helplessness. The guilt was unbearable. I should have done more. I should have protected her. Then, one night, everything changed. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when my phone buzzed. I reached for it automatically, assuming it was another well-meaning message from a friend. But when I saw the screen, my breath caught. It was a text from Claire's number. "Help me. He's keeping me in the woods. Near the old cabin." I bolted upright, my heart racing. It had to be her. But how? Was this a trap? A cruel trick? I called the number, but it went straight to voicemail. I stared at the screen, torn between hope and dread. If there was even a chance Claire was alive, I had to act. I forwarded the message to the detective handling the case and called him immediately. "I just got a text from Claire," I said, my voice frantic. "She says she's in the woods near an old cabin. You have to do something." The detective was cautious. "It could be a trap," he warned. "We need to approach this carefully. Stay put. I'll send a team to check it out. But staying put was the last thing I could do. I couldn't just sit there while Claire might be suffering, waiting for help that might come too late. Ignoring the detective's advice, I grabbed a flashlight, my phone, and the small camping knife I'd kept since that night. Then I headed out into the cold, dark night. The drive to the woods was a blur. The snow-covered trees loomed like silent sentinels, their branches casting eerie shadows across the road. I parked at the nearest trailhead and set off on foot, the crunch of my boots on the frozen ground the only sound in the stillness. The text hadn't specified which cabin, but I remembered seeing one during our hike, an old, dilapidated structure tucked deep in the forest. My gut told me that was where I needed to go. As I walked, the forest seemed to close in around me. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent my heart racing. I gripped the knife tightly, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. After what felt like hours, I saw it, the cabin. Its outline was barely visible through the trees, the faint glow of a light coming from within. My pulse quickened. I moved closer, keeping to the shadows, until I was just outside. Peering through a cracked window, I saw her. Claire was sitting on the floor, her hands bound, her face pale and gaunt. My chest tightened with a mix of relief and rage. She was alive. But where was he? I crept to the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. It creaked loudly as it opened, and I froze, holding my breath. "Claire," I whispered. "It's me." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock and fear. "Sarah," she whispered back, her voice barely audible. "You shouldn't be here." "He's..." A noise behind me cut her off. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as I turned slowly, my flashlight illuminating the face of the man who had haunted my nightmares. He smiled, his teeth gleaming in the dim light. "Well," he said, his voice dripping with mockery, "I was hoping you'd come." I froze, my heart hammering in my chest as his smile widened, his dark eyes gleaming with malice. He stood there, blocking the doorway, a knife glinting in his hand. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't leave Claire behind. "You've gone through a lot of trouble to find me," he said, his tone almost conversational. "It's flattering, really." "Let her go," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "You don't need to do this." He laughed, low and menacing. "Oh, I don't need to do anything. But where's the fun in letting you walk away now?" I gripped my camping knife tighter, my flashlight trembling in my other hand. "The police know where I am," I bluffed. "They're on their way. If you hurt us, you won't get far."